So 10 years ago, my husband died in a cycling accident at the age of 40. He was editor-in-chief for a business magazine, and I was a PhD at the Stockholm Resilience Centre. We had 3 little daughters, and whenever our busy dinners would allow conversation, we would talk about how we could create a better future for them. So when he suddenly passed away, I got to meet all of these bright and dedicated people in the business world who really wanted to take his legacy forward. Because in his role, he had created these platforms where people could meet within the business community to discuss sustainability, gender equality, diversity as the future for business. So I created a foundation in his memory, the Lisen Schultz Foundation for a More Humane Economy. And some really good people came onto the board, including Professor Johan Rockström, who was my boss at the time at the Stockholm Resilience Centre. And we held annual events where people would come together, discuss, and we would hand out awards. But after 5 years of inspiration and conversation at the foundation and advancements in science at the Stockholm Resilience Centre, we felt the need to accelerate action. The work we do at the Stockholm Resilience Centre focuses on this tiny, tiny place, the biosphere, a 20-kilometer thin layer around the planet Earth, which is the only place in the whole universe where we know that life can exist and where we can do things like business. So we decided to, instead of having 300 people come together once a year, we would select 16 prominent business leaders and have them meet for 5 days with sustainability scientists in a CEO program for both CEOs and chairpersons. And we launched this 2018 as a combination between the Stockholm Resilience Centre and this foundation. And since then, we have educated more than 60 leaders from really influential companies. And together, of course, they represent millions of customers and employees, and the environmental impact is many times that of Sweden's. We've also shared some of the lessons learned in this program and from this program in a book that was published last year, unfortunately only available in Swedish. And I was asked by the organizer of this event to tell you a bit about how we think around this issue of turning corporate leaders into climate leaders and how we work with that in the program, and to give you a glimpse into the key lessons. So that's what I'm going to do for the remainder of this talk. And I looked into this book by Per Espen Stoknes, who's an environmental psychologist, who have identified 5 barriers to climate action. And I figured they were quite neat in organizing this talk and looking into how our program tries to overcome that. And I'll first just go through the barriers. The first one, of course, is distance, that climate change has felt that's something happening far beyond the here and now, and also that it's something that you can't really affect. The other barrier is the sense of doom, that doesn't matter what we do, we're all doomed. The fact that it's so difficult to live in line with your understanding, for example, flying to this conference instead of taking the train, although we know the train is much better for the climate, creates an internal dissonance. And that can sometimes lead to this sense of denial. It's just too much to handle, and because we can't live the way we would like to live, we're just putting climate change to the side for someone else to solve, or even denying that it exists. And the final barrier is identity, that climate action is really for someone else with a different kind of political conviction or a different role or so. It's not for me. People like me, we don't do climate. So, of course, the first barrier, this of distance, has become more easy to address over the years as we all feel the effects of climate in the here and now. And I don't think I need to show you any movie clips of the floodings in Pakistan or droughts in Canada and Australia and fires and so on. We feel it in the here and now. And also we can see that business really makes a difference. There was this study coming out just a few years ago showing that out of the 200 largest economic entities in the world, 157 are actually corporates. And when addressing doom, I think it's important to establish that many big analyses and studies of whether we can actually meet everyone's needs within the capacity of the planet shows that it is possible. This planet has enough resources for all of us. It's not too late to act, and we also know pretty well what it takes. To the right here, you have the sources of emissions, and when you look at that, it's quite easy to see that it's critical to shift the energy system. And when you look at the green there, you see that it's also critical to shift the way we use our land, so agriculture and forestry. And in the energy sector, the use of the energy goes to transports, to buildings, to industry. So we need circularity, we need fossil-free transport, we need sustainable food systems, and we need green buildings. And that's it. So in total, we need to shift away from the fossil fuel-driven linear economy that is exploiting ecosystems and society to one that is circular, runs on renewable, and is restoring and regenerating the systems that we all depend on. We need to move fast, of course. Johan Rockström launched this idea of the carbon law a few years back, which says that if we look at the carbon dioxide budget that we have, we need, and we try and stay below 2 degrees Celsius of warming, we need to halve emissions every decade. And in addition to that, we need to shift agriculture from a source of carbon dioxide to a sink, and we need to develop systems that can absorb carbon and other greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. And of course, halving every decade, that's quick, but the idea was inspired by Moore's law that I think all of you know about. And compared to that, the doubling of capacity every 18 to 24 months, it's actually pretty slow. In order to address dissonance, we need to show that there are solutions that exist. And this project, the Exponential Roadmap, looked into 36 solutions for different sectors that would enable the first halving, the 10 years that are coming now. And in the meantime, we can develop the solutions for the next halving. And actually, they exist for every sector, from energy to industry to nature-based sinks and sources and buildings and so on. So we can also show that companies are picking up things and doing them, and that it can actually work from where you are and address this. So that's how we try and address dissonance. And then, of course, addressing denial. I think once we've removed these barriers, it's much easier to move away from denial. I also think that the people who come to our program have already done that. But I think it's still important to establish a shared knowledge base, a facts-based understanding of what the world looks like. So that's what I'm going to do now for a few slides. Just some key insights that we develop in this program. The first one is this striking set of graphs of the great acceleration. You know, we as a species has had a remarkable journey here in the biosphere. We have doubled and quadrupled and even more our population over the past 100 years. And now we're approaching 8, soon to be 10, 11 billion people on the planet. That's where the UN thinks it will actually level out, because you know, when women get access to education, to jobs, and the choice of how many children they're going to have, they actually get about 2 kids per woman. So this amazing journey has been fueled so far by use of fossil fuels and resources, and that has taken a toll on the planet that you can see in the green over here. And when you look at this picture, it's obvious that we are really reaching the limits for what the biosphere can handle. Another key insight is that biodiversity and climate needs to be addressed together. We've been quite good nowadays to understand the greenhouse gas emissions and how we need to get those down. But in fact, if you look at where these greenhouse gases come from and where they end up, you can see that, of course, they come from fossil fuels and cement, but also from our use of forestry and agriculture. And they don't all end up in the atmosphere. The biosphere has helped us by absorbing more than half of the emissions in vegetation on land and in the oceans. So that's why we need to maintain the biosphere as our best friend in also addressing climate change. This is research that just was updated a week ago, which is around these climate tipping points, which makes the situation even more scary. These are areas around the planet that have so far helped us regulate and stabilize the climate. Everything from the white ice on the poles that reflects the heat to the forests that absorb carbon dioxide through the photosynthesis. And when we warm the planet, these climate tipping elements run the risk of actually starting to accelerate the warming instead of buffering it. And you can see here that already at below 2 degrees of warming, some of them are beginning to move. So this is why we need to act fast. And this is the knowledge base that we provide. We believe that business leaders can take this. They can understand and see the situation for what it is, and then look into ways in which they can address it. The final point, or one of the final points on addressing the denial aspect of barriers, are those 9 planetary boundaries that I'm sure most of you have heard of. It's a concept that came out of the Stockholm Resilience Centre, and this analysis was also updated this latest year. It looks into the different pressures that we have on the planet and what is the safe operating space for humanity in which we can thrive without triggering these climate tipping points and other aspects of the biosphere. How can we maintain a biosphere that supports human well-being in the long term? And here you also see that it's not only about greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. It is about biodiversity. It is about how we use our land, our water, the novel entities and chemicals that we send out into the biosphere, and the leakage of nutrients from agriculture. So we need to address all of this as a whole. And at the same time, we need to continue human development. When the pandemic hit, some people saw this as a chance for the climate to recover, remember, because planes would stay on the ground and factories would stop and so on. But in fact, emissions only dropped 6 to 7% that year, and they were right up as soon as the economy recovered. So it's not about stopping, it's about shifting. And as you can see on this slide, we also have huge inequalities in the world that are growing, and this in turn makes it very difficult to get the collective action that we need to address those global challenges. So that's why climate action is also about people action and bringing everyone along so that we can meet everyone's needs within the planetary boundaries. So in order to address that final barrier around identity, that climate action is maybe not something for business leaders, but for politicians or activists or households, we show a range of examples of how companies are now actually taking up this challenge and acting on it from the perspective of doing business, because that's what business needs to do. They need to survive long term. And one example is this Science-Based Targets initiative that was created in the uprun to the Paris negotiations back in 2015, and who brought prominent business leaders forward who were interested in actually setting climate targets in line with the science and in line with the agreement. And since then, this initiative has grown. And what's interesting, I think, is that when these big companies set these targets, make them explicit, measure them, they also put pressure on their suppliers and they support their customers in the shift. And so this is beginning to create a different alternative economy where at some point it won't be feasible any longer, neither for investments nor for employees and attracting talent, nor for attracting customers to be in the old economy. You need to move into the new one. And I think what's also fun to see is that now this initiative has inspired work to address the other planetary boundaries. So this is the next step. After you've addressed the carbon dioxide emissions and greenhouse gases, you go into setting targets for nature. So everything from fresh water to land and oceans and so on in this guide. So to conclude, I wanted to give you some key insights from what corporate leaders do who actually become climate leaders, what we've seen, and I can give you many examples of this. But the first thing I think to remember is to really dig where you stand. And what I mean by that is to look into why your company was created, what is the purpose of this, and how can that purpose help shift the world to a place where everyone's needs are met within the planetary capacity. And then to actually do what you can in the here and now. to get momentum. Sometimes people ask me if I'm optimistic or hopeful or pessimistic and so on. I think that's not so interesting to ask whether we can make it or not. It's not binary, but hope comes from action. And when you start acting and realizing that actually that creates value for you and for the planet, then that gives you the hope to continue working. So digging where you stand. It's a Swedish expression. I'm not sure it works in English, but I hope you get the sense. The other thing, of course, is to set a long-term vision and what is it that you want to do? What do you want to become? Not all of these companies are sustainable, of course, from the start, but they can have a vision for becoming that. And then to set clear targets that you actually follow and measure up, that it becomes part of the everyday work of the company. And to disclose that so that other people can hold you accountable. And I know about the 600 different frameworks for ESG that exist in the world and all the increasing reportings and so on. That is a challenge for companies. But what I'm looking into, what I'm asking for here is to really measure what matters and help that build your strategy forward rather than just ticking off boxes. The third thing is to create ripples in the water. Remember the Science-Based Targets Initiative and how that actually affects both suppliers and customers and so on, where you can actually, in your company, think about how can you help others take where they stand and help them cut their emissions and become more effective. Fourth is something that not everyone thinks about, but companies and business leaders have an immense impact on policy, on norms in society, through their employees and through their interactions with politicians and different associations. They shape the playing field for what is acceptable and not. And of course, not everything that's sustainable is profitable today. And so to address those issues, you actually need to help shape the playing field in the right direction and use your voice there so that your lobby department is in line with this overarching purpose. The final thing, I think, is maybe the most important thing in these times that we're in. We're getting into a time now of massive change, lots of uncertainty, lots of volatility. Things are happening, many things at the same time. We're getting into a situation where we just have to learn to live with and make use of change. And that is what resilience is about. It's about accepting that life is very uncertain. And that you have to stay the course. You need to maintain the direction and be adaptive and flexible at the same time. That requires continuous learning, attentiveness, collaboration, and maintaining a wide range of response options. And that we need to manage to do at the same time as we work on these concrete actions. Final quote that I really love. I'm a biologist by training. I love everything that lives, almost. I think it's quite encouraging to think about the fact that life finds a way. It's incredibly adaptive and resilient. The quote is from Jurassic Park, as maybe some of you know, so it's not the highest level of literature, but still I think it holds true. And I genuinely hope that human life will find a way to be part of life, and maybe even business will do the same. So thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.